Today, we're going to be looking at the FLX the Weapon, which is an e-mountain bike that's currently in the tooling development stage of its project timeline. The Weapon is made by FLX, a very small bike company that's based out of San Diego that was established in 2016 by Rob Rast. FLX specializes in producing electric bikes, everything from lightweight road-style e-bikes to throwback moto-style e-bikes. And while FLX does have a couple hardtail e-mountain bikes, the Weapon is their first endeavor into a full suspension e-mountain bike that's designed to compete with all the big companies. With the Weapon being touted as the ultimate all-mountain e-mountain bike, with the motor putting out an astonishing 120 Nm of torque. So in this video, I'm going to go over the specs, details, ride impressions, and testing the claimed torque numbers to see if the Weapon is really deserving of its name. But before we move on, I do want to give a special thank you to FLX for inviting both my buddy eMTB Trail Review and me to borrow a couple of the prototype bikes to ride over the course of a weekend. And something to keep in mind is that the bikes we rode were prototypes, so some of the parts might be different from the final production model, but I will point these out in the video when discussing. So now, let's discuss the torque monster known as the FLX the Weapon. The Weapon is made from hand-laid carbon fiber, and the frame has a really nice shape that does a really good job of hiding the massive battery. And just in case you're wondering, this is not an off-the-shelf frame ordered from a catalog. This frame was designed from scratch by FLX, which is a pretty amazing feat for such a small company. The Weapon also comes with 29-inch wheels and has 160 mm of travel up front and 150 in the rear. It also has a 66-degree head angle, a 73.8-degree C-tube angle, and pretty moderate reach, with the small having a 426 mm reach, the medium a 456 mm reach, and the large is a 486 mm. And the wheelbase is pretty long, with the small coming in at 1,215 mm, and the wheelbase increasing 30 mm with each size up. And even though it is a pretty long bike, the geometry feels more like an all-mountain bike, as opposed to a full-fledged enduro bike. So like I mentioned earlier in the video, this bike is a prototype. So there's going to be a couple different parts in the test bike that will differ from the production bike specs that are listed on the FLX website. Also, there's going to be two models available when production does start, the Weapon and the Weapon X. So I'm also going to point out the differences in the builds as well. The fork was a DVO Onyx D1 with 160 mm of travel, which according to the FLS website is not the fork that will come with either model. The standard model will come with the DVO Onyx SCE2, while the X build will come with the upgraded E1, which is DVO's top line e-bike enduro fork. The rear shock was a DVO Topaz Gen 3, which is what the X model will get, while the standard model will get the DVO Opal T2. The motor is a Bafang M600, which has a peak power output of 750 watts. It delivers up to 120 Nm of torque, it weighs in at 8.6 pounds, and has 5 levels of assist. But the Weapon X model is going to come with the Bafang M610, which is currently still in development and will have a rated peak power output of 1,000 watts. It's also going to have 120 Nm of torque and be about 1.5 pounds lighter than the M600. I did ask FLX the main difference between the two motors, and they said other than being lighter, the main difference is that the power delivery on the M610 will remain consistent as the cadence goes up. So what that means in simple terms is that with the standard motor, when your cadence increases, the power starts to dip. But with the M610 motor, it will maintain a high power output even when your cadence goes up. So essentially, you're going to go up hills much faster. The Weapon uses an integrated 48 volt, 840 watt lithium ion battery that has a projected maximum range of 70 miles and should take about 6 hours to charge from empty. And while on my big test ride loop, in which I used level 3 the whole time, with the exception of a couple times using level 5 for about 2 to 3 minutes, I rode 13.57 miles with 2,461 feet of climbing, and I only used 29% of the battery. Based on this, the estimated range would have been about 47 miles with about 8,500 feet of climbing, which is stunning. So I have no doubt that 70 miles is an attainable number on a mountain bike ride with less climbing and using a lower power assist level. The handlebars are Spank spikes with Vibrocore, which is what the Weapon X will come with. The standard model will have the regular Spank alloy handlebars. The wheels were Spank alloy wheels, which is what the standard Weapon will come with. The Weapon X will come with the Spank Uzi 350s. The tires on the demo bike were Maxxis DHFs in the front and Maxxis Assagais in the rear. The standard model will come with Maxxis Forecasters, both front and rear, and the Weapon X will have the Assagai in the front and the Dissector in the rear. The brakes are Magura MT7s, which is what the Weapon X will come with. The standard model will get the MT5s. There are also 203 rotors, both front and rear. The prototype came with a SRAM EX1 11-speed derailleur with a 48-tooth cassette, but the standard production model will receive an 11-speed Shimano Dior, and the Weapon X will get a 12-speed SRAM GX. And lastly is the SDG dropper post, which comes with 150mm of drop. So now that we've gone over the specs and build, let's discuss what really matters. What's it like to ride? So I typically don't go too far in depth on my bike reviews on the climbing, but since this is a powerful e-bike, and it's marketed as being one of the most powerful e-bikes on the market, I did some extra testing on the climbing ability of the Weapon. So to get this out of the way right from the start, the Weapon is an absolute monster on the climbs. On the long steep pedally hills, this bike just flies up at silly speeds. The GoPro doesn't show how steep this climb is, but it was so effortless it just felt unreal. But the crazy part is not only is it fast on long double track climbs, but it's shockingly good on tight technical climbs as well. I believe this is due to the Weapon's normal head angle, long chain stays, and centered seating position. The one thing that I do have to note is that climbing up technical trails isn't recommended on the level 5 setting. The bike is just too powerful and it's hard to control for rocks and corners. So while my buddy and I are riding up a steep climb, we passed another mountain biker like nothing. But as we passed him, I noticed to my surprise that he had an e-bike, and we dropped him like he was on an analog bike. Mind you, I have no idea what assist level he was using, but I was only using level 3. But it got me thinking, how powerful is the Weapon really? So I decided to do a couple of tests to see how fast and capable the Weapon was up hills. So the first test was to ride up an extremely steep and technical hill that I normally hike up. And to give you some perspective, this trail is only about 1/5 of a mile long, but there is 120 feet of elevation gain. And I've never even heard of a bike attempting this climb before. So let's see how it went.
Alright, here we go. So we're going to attempt this climb. We're level 5 and we're doing the second to the biggest chainring. Here we go. I rode down this bike, did amazing on the downhill, so this is definitely more of a trail bike, but on the climbing, that geometry just makes this absolutely lovely. So that was super easy, but this next part is the super hard part, very technical, very steep. So let's see if we can do it. So like I said, we're not in the granny gear. Here we go. Okay, this part's super technical. Straight up. Whew. Okay. Wow, this thing just powers straight up this hill. It's kind of crazy actually how easy it is, but oh, dang it. That was just a lack of skill. Too technical for me, but we'll finish out the trail anyways.
So as you can tell, riding up the hill was a breeze, minus the technical part that I couldn't clear. But you know what? That wasn't the bike's fault. There is no doubt in my mind that the bike could clean the whole section with someone who's a much better rider than myself. So for the second test, I don't want to just ride the bike up a steep hill really fast, because that doesn't really show the power and the speed of the Weapon. So what we decided to do was race my buddy who has a Koner mode e-bike up a long fire road climb. The climb is pretty steep and has about 500 feet of elevation gain. The rules were that we'll both be using the highest level of assistance, and I would give him a 10-second head start. And just in case you're wondering, he is the stronger and more powerful climber between the two of us.
So we gave Chris a little head start way up there, so you can catch him. Way up there. To your left. doing 22 of this. "23 miles an hour. To your left.
So as you just saw, the FLX flies up hills, and it's substantially more powerful and faster up climbs than at least the Kona Remote. So now that we've established that the FLX is an absolute beast on climbs, how does it go downhill? Well, it's extremely fast and surprisingly agile. Just by looking at the weapon and its build, you would think that this bike is an enduro smasher, but it's really not. To me, this bike felt more like an aggressive trail bike with enduro suspension. And trust me, that isn't a bad thing. This bike corners and changes direction like a normal trail bike, which really surprised me. Most enduro bikes that I've ridden have to be pushed pretty hard to make them come alive, and they're really not that fun on normal trails. But the weapon was a lot of fun, regardless of what kind of trail I took it on. It carved corners like a champ, and it was really easy to get the back end to hang out. Now, does that mean that it can't handle enduro trails? Absolutely not. I took it on some super rocky technical trails, and it ate everything up. And while I certainly don't think that it can handle the rough stuff as good as an enduro bike, it was pretty darn close. But the one part that really threw me off though, is that the bike felt really stiff and the suspension wasn't as plush as I was hoping. But I really can't hold that against the bike for a couple reasons. First, this is a prototype bike with a mishmash of parts. Second, since it's a demo prototype, you can tell this bike has been abused and ridden hard. So the brakes were a little squeaky and there were scratches everywhere. But I could tell that the bike frame itself had taken the abuse very well. Third, is that there were tubes in this bike, so I was running much higher tire pressures than I would have if it were tubeless. And since I took the bike to test at Black Mountain in San Diego, which is a giant rock pit, I didn't want to risk getting a puncture or dinging a wheel since it's not my bike. And lastly, is that I only had a couple days with the bike to ride and film, so I didn't get to actually tinker with the suspension and find a setup that worked for me. I was able to get the fork to feel pretty good, but I just wasn't able to get that shock to my liking. But the one thing that surprised me the most about the bike was its jumping capability. I'm not that great at jumping, and the bike does almost weigh 60 pounds, but I couldn't believe how well it jumped. I have friends with e-bikes, and they say that their e-bikes tend to have a heavy front feeling due to the battery in the down tube. But this bike felt poppy and light in the air, and you can move it around at your own will. And it only took me about 3 to 4 jumps before I felt really comfortable in the air. With a combination of a big battery, crazy climbing ability, agile cornering, and fantastic jumping characteristics, this bike would be the bike to take to a bike park where you have to pedal to the top, like Sky Park at Santa's Village. But if you're interested in buying the FLX weapon or the Weapon X, unfortunately, you will have to wait until June of 2023. The Weapon X will retail for $10,000, and the standard weapon will be $7,800. But right now, the weapon is on Indiegogo, and if you order early, you can get the regular weapon for $3,900 and the Weapon X for $49,000, which is a freaking steal for these bikes. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised by the FLX weapon. The best way that I can describe riding this bike is that it's an experience. It's just ridiculous on the uphills. It's fast on the downhills. It has fun and snappy handling, it jumps really well, and most importantly is that it's a lot of fun to ride. This bike is designed for a specific buyer in mind. If you dislike e-bikes because you feel that they're cheating, then you're really going to hate this bike. And if you're a mountain biker with a regular mountain bike, you might not like it either, because if you're riding with someone who has an FLX weapon, you're going to get smoked. This bike is unapologetic in its lunacy, and that's the thing I love about it the most. The FLX is fully aware of it, and they embrace that the weapon isn't for everybody. This bike is the Dodge Hellcat of e-mount bikes. Is it too much power and overkill? Absolutely. But that's why I love that it exists.